The floor shook before the alarm even sounded. I was 3 steps behind the royal procession when the first explosion tore through the crystal pillars on the eastern wall of the court. Glass rained down in sheets, catching the light like falling stars, and for a moment nobody moved because nobody understood what was happening. Then the screaming started, and understanding came fast and ugly. My name is Ethan Cole. I was not a soldier. I was not a bodyguard. I was a translator, assigned to the human delegation on the Virali homeworld, and my only job that day was to stand quietly behind Ambassador Grant and make sure nothing got lost between our language and theirs. I was supposed to be invisible. Diplomats like invisible. Invisible people do not get blamed when things go wrong. But invisible people also do not get to decide what happens next when the ceiling starts falling. The royal court of the Virali Empire was built inside a mountain of pale blue stone, carved over centuries by artisans who treated architecture like scripture. Every pillar told a story. Every archway marked a reign. I had been briefed on all of it during the long shuttle ride down from our ship, the Meridian, 3 weeks earlier. I had memorized the names of dead queens and living generals. I had practiced the correct angle of a bow, the correct distance to stand from nobility, the correct way to lower my eyes when a member of the royal bloodline passed by. Nobody had briefed me on what to do when the court exploded. The Virali were tall, elegant beings, with skin the color of deep water, and eyes that shifted color with their mood. Their culture ran on rules of distance and formality so strict that even a misplaced glance could end a career. And above all other rules, one stood taller than the rest, repeated to me so many times before I ever set foot on their soil that I could recite it in my sleep. Never touch a member of the royal family, not a handshake, not a graze of fabric, nothing. I had asked why, back on the Meridian, sitting across from Captain Owen Blake in the briefing room with a cup of bitter synthetic coffee going cold in my hands. Because touch means something different to them, he had said. It is not casual, it is not friendly. To the Virali, physical contact with royalty is treated as a declaration, almost a legal one. It can mean loyalty. It can mean an oath. In some cases, historically, it has meant something closer to marriage. Nobody outside their bloodline is permitted to touch them, ever, under any condition. Break that rule and you are not just embarrassing yourself. You could be starting a war. I had nodded and told him I understood. I did not yet understand. Not really. Understanding a rule on paper and understanding it in your bones are 2 very different things. So when the second explosion hit, closer this time, and the ceiling above the royal dais cracked into a spiderweb of fractures, I understood the rule in my head. I understood I was supposed to step back, stay silent, protect nothing but my own position among the humans clustered near the far wall. Instead, I looked up and saw the block of stone falling directly toward a girl who could not have been older than 17, standing frozen in place while the entire court scattered around her like startled birds. Her name was Kaya. I knew that much from the guest list. Kaya Thasarai, only daughter of Queen Nasara, heir to the Virali throne. I had seen her twice before that day, always from a careful distance, always surrounded by a wall of silent guards who moved like they had been carved from the same stone as the palace itself. There were no guards near her now. They had scattered toward the explosion at the eastern wall, chasing the source of the attack, leaving the girl standing alone beneath a ceiling that was coming apart above her head. I did not decide to move. My body simply moved, the way it does when there is no time left to think, only time left to act. I crossed the space between us in what felt like half a second and half a lifetime, and I threw myself forward, wrapping my arms around her and pulling her sideways with everything I had. The stone hit the floor where she had been standing a heartbeat earlier, cracking the polished tile into pieces, and sending a cloud of pale dust rolling across the court. For a moment, neither of us moved. I was still holding her, my arms locked around her shoulders, both of us on the ground in a tangle of torn ceremonial robes and settling dust. Her eyes were wide, a deep violet color I had never seen on a Virali before, and I realized with a jolt of horror exactly what I had done. I had touched her. Not just touched her. I had grabbed her, pulled her against me, held her on the ground in front of the entire royal court. I let go so fast I nearly fell backward. I scrambled up, putting distance between us, my hands raised in the universal gesture of I meant no harm, my mind already racing through every possible way this moment could end my career, end the diplomatic mission, maybe end more than that. The dust was still settling. The screaming from the eastern wall had turned into shouted orders as guards finally moved to secure the area where the explosions had come from. But near the dais, where the princess and I stood, something else was happening. Something quieter, and somehow far more dangerous. Every viral eye within sight had stopped moving. I do not mean they paused, I mean they stopped entirely, the way a video freezes on a single frame. Guards halfway through drawing their weapons stood locked in place. Nobles who had been fleeing toward the exit stood frozen mid-stride. Even the queen herself, who had been rising from her throne with fury written across her face at the attack on her court, stood utterly still, one hand raised, her violet eyes fixed not on the smoking wall where the explosion had come from, but on me. On the human who had just put his hands on her daughter. I felt my stomach drop somewhere below the cracked tile floor. Kaya was still sitting where I had left her, brushing dust from her robes with hands that trembled slightly. She looked up at me, and I braced myself for horror, for anger, for the look of violation I had been warned would follow any unwanted touch. Instead, she looked confused, not angry, confused, and something else beneath it that I could not name yet. I have to say something, I thought. I have to explain. I have to apologize before this becomes something I cannot undo. I opened my mouth, but before a single word came out, Kaya rose to her feet in one smooth motion, closed the distance between us, and wrapped her arms around me. It was not a formal gesture. It was not careful or measured or performed for an audience. It was the kind of hug a person gives when relief crashes over them all at once, when the fear finally catches up and needs somewhere to go. Her arms went around my shoulders, and her face pressed briefly against the side of my head, and for 3 or 4 seconds that felt like an entire lifetime, the heir to the virile throne held onto me like I was the only solid thing left standing in a court that had just tried to kill her. If the room had been frozen before, it was something beyond frozen now. I heard no gasps. Nobody screamed. The silence that followed was worse than any sound could have been, a silence so complete that I could hear my own heartbeat slamming against my ribs, so complete that the distant crackle of fire from the eastern wall seemed impossibly loud by comparison. The queen had not moved. Her raised hand was still frozen in the air, but her eyes had changed. The shifting color I had read about in briefing documents was happening in real time, violet bleeding into something darker, something I had no reference for and no way to interpret. I did not know if I was looking at rage or shock or grief or all three tangled together. General Drask Van, commander of the Royal Guard, stood near the shattered eastern wall with a weapon still drawn, his attention split between the source of the attack and the impossible scene unfolding near the dais. I saw his jaw tighten. I saw his free hand curl into a fist at his side. Whatever the virile felt about touch, this man felt it more sharply than most, and the look he gave me across the wreckage of the court was not confusion. It was something closer to promise, and not a kind one. Kaya finally stepped back from me, though slowly, as if she were only now realizing what she had done, and what it might mean. She looked at her own hands like they belonged to someone else. Then she looked past me, toward her mother, and I watched her face shift from relief into something like dread. "Guards," my queen said, and her voice cut through the silence like a blade through fabric. Her voice was quiet, but it carried across the entire ruined court without effort. "Secure the human." 4 guards moved at once, closing around me in a tight circle, weapons raised, none of them touching me, but all of them close enough that I understood exactly how little choice I had in what happened next. I did not resist. I raised my hands slowly and let them guide me back, away from the princess, away from the dais, away from the girl I had just pulled from beneath a falling ceiling. Kaya took a step forward like she meant to say something, to explain, to stop what was happening. Her mother's eyes shifted to her, and whatever the queen's expression communicated in that silent instant, it was enough to freeze her daughter in place a second time that day. This time not from fear of falling stone, but from something else entirely. I was marched out of the royal court between 4 armed guards, past nobles who stared at me with expressions I could not read, past smoke still curling from the shattered eastern wall, past Ambassador Grant, whose face had gone the color of old paper, past Mara Doyle, our security officer, whose hand had drifted instinctively toward a weapon she was not permitted to carry inside the palace. Nobody spoke to me. Nobody explained where I was being taken or what would happen when we arrived. I walked in silence through corridors carved from pale blue stone, past murals depicting queens who had ruled centuries before I was born, and I thought about the warmth of Kaya's arms around my shoulders, and the way the entire room had gone still as death the moment she touched me. I had come to this planet to translate words between 2 species who barely understood each other. I had never expected to become the center of an incident that could unravel everything we had spent years building. I had never expected a single instinctive act, a single moment of reaching out to save someone from falling stone, to matter more than any speech, any treaty, any careful diplomatic maneuver. But as the guards led me deeper into the palace, past doors that sealed behind us with a heavy, final sound, I understood one thing with total clarity. Whatever came next, my life on this planet had just changed forever, and there was no version of the coming days that would let me disappear quietly back into the role of invisible translator standing behind someone else's shoulder. The rule had been simple: never touch the royal family. I had broken it in front of the entire court, and the entire court had frozen because of it. Now I had to find out exactly what that meant, and whether I would survive long enough to see how the story ended. The cell they put me in was not a cell in the way I understood the word. There were no bars, no chains, nothing that looked like punishment at first glance. It was a small round room, carved from the same pale blue stone as the rest of the palace, with a single window too narrow to climb through, and a door that sealed itself with a sound like a held breath being released. I sat on the edge of a stone bench and waited, because there was nothing else to do. My hands would not stop shaking. I kept replaying the moment in my head: the falling stone, the girl standing frozen, the decision that had not felt like a decision at all. I could have let the guards handle it. I could have shouted a warning and stayed where I was supposed to stay, invisible, uninvolved, safe. Instead, I had moved, and now I did not know if I would be executed, exiled, or simply forgotten in this small round room, until the humans and the virili found some quiet way to make the whole incident disappear. I do not know how long I sat there before the door opened again, long enough that the light through the narrow window had shifted from the pale gold of afternoon to something dimmer, something closer to evening. When the door finally slid open, it was not a guard who entered. It was Yulin Kest, senior advisor to the Queen, a thin, silver-eyed virili I had met once during a formal reception weeks earlier. He had shaken my hand that day, one of the rare virili willing to observe human customs for the sake of diplomacy, and he had smiled while doing it, a careful, practiced smile that told me nothing about what he actually thought of us. There was no smile now. "You understand the severity of what happened," he said, settling onto a bench across from me without waiting for an invitation. "I understand that I touched the princess," I said. "I understand that is forbidden. I did not do it to disrespect anyone. There was a wall falling. I did not have time to consider protocol." Yulin studied me for a long moment, his silver eyes catching the last of the dying light through the window. "That is precisely the problem," he said. "You did not consider protocol. Among my people, contact with the royal bloodline is never accidental, because we are raised from birth to understand the weight of it. Every virili child learns before they can walk that hands are kept to themselves around anyone wearing the royal mark. It is not merely rude to break that rule. It is legally significant." "Significant how?" I asked, though some part of me did not want the answer. He was quiet for a moment, choosing his words the way a person chooses steps across unstable ground. "Physical contact with a member of the royal bloodline, initiated or accepted, is treated under our oldest laws as a declaration of bond," he said finally. "Historically, it marked alliances between houses, in some cases marriages, in every case, a statement that cannot be easily undone once it has been witnessed by the court." The room felt smaller than it had a moment ago. I thought about the way the princess had crossed the distance between us, the way her arms had gone around my shoulders in front of the entire frozen court, and I understood, finally and completely, why every face in that room had turned toward us in silence. "I did not ask for that," I said. "I saved her from a falling wall. She was the one who moved toward me." "That is what makes this so complicated," Yulin said. "You are correct that the initial contact, your action to save her life, would likely be forgiven under emergency provisions written into our law centuries ago. Saving a royal life through physical intervention has precedent. It is regrettable, but survivable, politically speaking." "But," I said, hearing the word hanging unspoken in the air between us. "But the princess's action afterward was not an emergency," Yulin said. "She was not falling. She was not in danger. She chose, in full awareness, in front of witnesses including her own mother, to embrace you. That is not something our law forgives easily. That is not an accident. That is a statement, whether she intended it as one or not, and the entire court saw it happen." I sat with that for a long moment, trying to find some version of the situation where it did not sound as catastrophic as it felt. "What happens now?" I asked. "That depends on many things," Yulin said, rising from the bench. "Some in the court will call for your removal from the planet, perhaps your execution, though I believe the Queen has more sense than to start a war with the humans over an act of instinct and gratitude. Others, and this may surprise you, will see an opportunity in what happened today." "An opportunity," I repeated. There are factions within our court who believe the Virali Empire has grown too closed, too afraid of the outside, Yulin said. They will look at what happened today, an outsider risking himself to save the heir, and they will use it as proof that not every stranger to our world is a threat. Others, led by General Drask, will see the opposite. They will say this proves exactly why humans cannot be trusted near the royal family, that your presence brought danger to the court in the first place, that the attack itself may even be connected to your delegation's arrival. The accusation landed like a fresh blow. I had almost forgotten, in the chaos of everything that followed, that someone had actually tried to kill the princess that day. The explosions along the eastern wall had not been an accident. Someone had planned an attack on the royal court, and now, somehow, I had become tangled up in the aftermath in a way that made me look either like a hero or a suspect, depending entirely on who was doing the looking. Do they think I had something to do with the attack? I asked, my voice tighter than I meant it to be. Some will say it, Yulin admitted. Whether they believe it is a different question. Suspicion is a useful tool for those who wish to remove humans from this planet entirely, and General Drask has wanted that for a very long time. The door opened again before I could ask anything further, and this time it was not Yulin's calm, measured presence that entered the room. 2 guards flanked the doorway, and between them walked a figure I recognized immediately even though I had never stood this close to her before. Queen Nisara Thasarai moved into the small stone room like the walls themselves had been built to make space for her. She was tall, taller than her daughter, with the same deep violet eyes, though hers had settled into a color I still could not name, something between storm and calm. She wore no crown, no obvious symbol of rule, and yet there was no question in my mind, or in the room, about who held authority over everyone present. Yulin bowed low and stepped back toward the wall. The guards remained at the door. I stood, unsure whether standing was correct, or whether I had already broken enough rules for one day to make the distinction meaningless. Sit, the queen said, and I sat. She did not sit across from me the way Yulin had. She stood, studying me with an intensity that made the narrow window and the stone walls feel even smaller than before. Tell me what happened, she said. Not the version the guards reported, not the version my advisors will construct for their own purposes. What you saw, what you did, in your own words. So I told her. I described the explosion, the falling stone, the guards scattered toward the source of the attack, the princess standing alone and frozen, while the ceiling came apart above her. I told her I had not thought about protocol or law or diplomatic consequence. I had only thought that a person was about to be crushed, and that I was the only one close enough to do anything about it. When I finished, the queen was silent for a long moment, her eyes never leaving mine. You risked your life for my daughter, she said finally. It was not a question, but I answered it anyway. Yes, I said. Without knowing whether you would survive the attempt, she said. I did not think about it, I admitted. I just moved. Something shifted in her expression then, something I could not fully interpret, but it was not the fury I had braced myself for. It looked, if anything, closer to exhaustion, the kind that comes from carrying more than any one person should have to carry. My daughter tells me the same thing you have told me, she said. That your action was instinct, not calculation, that she does not regret what she did afterward, though she understands the difficulty it has created. Is she safe? I asked, before I could stop myself. It was not my place to ask questions of a queen, but the words came out before I could weigh them. The queen's eyes narrowed slightly, though not with anger. My daughter is safe, she said. Protected now by twice the guards she had this morning, and questioned by advisors who wished to understand exactly what she was thinking when she chose, in full view of the court, to embrace a human she has known for less than a season. I did not have an answer for that, because I did not know the answer myself. The queen studied me a moment longer, then turned toward the door, her guards falling into step behind her. Before she left, she paused, glancing back over her shoulder with an expression that was somehow both warning and something gentler beneath it. You have made yourself impossible to ignore, human, she said. Some in this court will want you gone before the sun rises again. Others will want to use you for purposes you do not yet understand. I would advise you to decide, quickly, what you want for yourself in the middle of all of it, because very few people in this palace will ask you that question, and the answer will matter more than you know. The door sealed behind her with that same soft final sound, and I sat alone in the narrow stone room, turning her words over in my mind, aware for the first time that surviving the day was only the beginning of a much larger problem still waiting to unfold. They released me 2 days later, though release is a generous word for what actually happened. I was moved from the narrow stone cell to a guarded set of rooms within the human delegation's wing of the palace, close enough to Ambassador Grant and the rest of my colleagues that it might have looked, to an outsider, like ordinary lodging. But there were guards outside my door at every hour, and I understood without being told that I was not free. I was simply being kept somewhere more comfortable while the court decided what to do with me. Mara Doyle found a way to speak with me on the first evening, slipping past the guards with the kind of practiced ease that made me wonder exactly how much of her security training had involved getting into places she was not supposed to be. "You look terrible," she said, dropping into the chair across from mine without waiting for permission. "Thank you," I said. "It has been a difficult week." She did not laugh, though I could tell she wanted to. Mara had a soldier's sense of humor, dry and quick, but her eyes were serious when she leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "Do you understand what you have walked into?" she asked. "I understand pieces of it," I said. "I understand the touch is a big deal. I understand some people want me gone and some people apparently want to use me for something. I do not understand the rest." Mara glanced toward the door, lowering her voice even though we were alone. "The rest is this," she said. "There are two factions fighting for influence in this court right now, and you have become the fault line running straight through the middle of them. One side is led by an advisor named Cyril Thane, who has spent years arguing that the Virilai Empire needs to open itself to outside alliances, including with us, before it gets left behind by every other power in this part of the galaxy. The other side is led by General Drask, who believes contact with outsiders has always led to disaster for his people, going back generations. He has old scars to back that belief up, and old scars do not listen to reason very easily. And I am standing in the middle of both arguments," I said. "You are the argument," Mara said. "Whether you like it or not, everyone in that court now sees you as proof of something. Cyril's people see proof that a human can act with honor and courage on behalf of the royal family, that we are not the threat Drask claims we are. Drask's people see proof that our presence here invites chaos, that an outsider getting close enough to touch the heir to the throne is a security failure that should never be allowed to happen again." I thought about the falling stone, the frozen room, the warmth of an embrace I had never asked for, and could not have refused even if I had wanted to. None of it had felt like an argument at the time. It had felt like the only thing worth doing in the space of a single terrifying second. "What does the princess think?" I asked, before I could decide whether it was wise to ask it. Mara's expression shifted, something careful entering her eyes. "That is the question everyone in the palace is asking," she said. "And from what I have heard, she has not stopped defending you since the moment they pulled you away from her. She has argued with her own mother about how you have been treated. She has refused to apologize for what she did, even when advisors pushed her to frame it as a moment of panic rather than a choice." That surprised me more than anything else Mara had said. "I do not know her," I said. "We exchanged maybe a dozen words before that day." "Sometimes that is not what matters," Mara said. "Sometimes what matters is what a person does in a moment when there is no time to think it through. You proved something to her in half a second that most people spend years failing to prove. She is not the kind of person who forgets that easily, from what I understand of her reputation in this court." Before I could ask anything further, the door to my room slid open without warning, and two guards entered, not the same ones who had stood watch outside, but soldiers wearing the darker uniform of the royal military rather than the palace guard. Mara rose instantly, her posture shifting into something sharper, more alert. "General Drask wishes to speak with the human," one of the soldiers said, his voice flat and formal. Mara stepped between me and the door, though we both knew it would not stop anything if the soldiers decided to act. "It is late," she said. "He can request a meeting through proper channels in the morning." "The general does not wait for morning," the soldier said, and something in his tone told me arguing further would accomplish nothing. I told Mara to stay behind, though I doubted she would listen, and I followed the soldiers out into the corridor, through winding halls lit by soft blue light that pulsed faintly like something alive, until we reached a chamber near the military wing of the palace that looked nothing like the elegant, formal spaces I had seen elsewhere in the court. This room was practical, all sharp edges and reinforced stone, weapons mounted along one wall in careful rows. General Drask Van stood near a window overlooking the city below, his back to me when I entered. He did not turn immediately, and I stood in silence, waiting, unwilling to speak first in a room that clearly belonged to him in every sense that mattered. "Do you know how long I have served this royal family?" he asked finally, still facing the window. "I do not," I said. "Since before the current queen was born," he said. "I served her mother, and her mother's mother before that." I have watched outsiders come to this court promising friendship and leave nothing behind but broken promises and worse. I have buried soldiers who died trusting people who did not deserve that trust. I am sorry for your losses, I said, and I meant it, even though I suspected sympathy was not what he wanted to hear from me. He turned then, and his eyes, a deep storm gray rather than the violet common among most virilii I had met, fixed on me with an intensity that made the room feel colder than it had a moment ago. I do not want your sorrow, he said. I want you to understand exactly what you have done. You may believe your actions were noble. Perhaps, in isolation, they were. But nobility does not exist in isolation in a royal court. Every action becomes a piece on a board played by people far more skilled than you at moving pieces where they want them to go. What do you want from me? I asked. I want you gone from this planet, he said, without hesitation. I want the human delegation to understand that whatever gratitude the princess feels toward you does not erase the danger your presence represents. I have already lost one attempt to convince the queen of this. I do not intend to lose a second. One attempt, I repeated, something cold settling in my chest. Are you saying you believe I am connected to the attack? He studied me for a long moment before answering. I am saying the timing of that attack, coinciding precisely with your arrival in the court that day, is not something I am willing to dismiss as coincidence, he said. I am saying I intend to find out the truth, regardless of what it costs, and if that truth points toward you or your people, I will not hesitate to act on it. I had done nothing wrong beyond an instinct to protect someone from harm, but standing in that room, facing a man who had spent his entire life defending a family and a nation from threats real and imagined, I understood that innocence was not always enough to protect a person from suspicion. I did not plan an attack, I said. I did not know it was coming. I only reacted when it happened, the same as anyone else in that room would have, if they had been standing close enough and quick enough to do something about it. Drask's expression did not soften. Perhaps that is true, he said. Perhaps it is not. I intend to find out, and until I do, you would be wise to remember that this palace has many rooms far less comfortable than the one you are currently allowed to occupy. He dismissed me without another word, turning back toward the window, and the soldiers led me back through the winding corridors to my quarters, where Mara was waiting, pacing near the door with barely restrained frustration. What did he say? She asked the moment the guards left us alone. He thinks I might be connected to the attack, I said, still trying to process the accusation myself. He wants me removed from the planet, and he is not going to stop looking for a reason to make that happen. Mara's jaw tightened. Then we need to find out who actually planted those explosives before he decides you are close enough to blame, she said. Because if he cannot find the real attacker, you become a very convenient answer to a question everyone in this court desperately wants closed. I sat down heavily, the weight of the last 2 days finally catching up with me all at once. I had come to this planet to translate words between two cultures who barely understood each other. Now I was caught in the middle of a struggle over the future of an empire, suspected of a crime I had no part in, and somewhere deeper in this palace, a princess who barely knew me was still defending a choice she had made in a single unguarded moment, a choice that had frozen an entire royal court and set every one of these events into motion. I did not know yet who had planted the explosives that nearly killed her. I did not know if I would still be on this planet by the end of the week, or whether General Drask's suspicion would harden into something I could not talk my way out of. But I understood, sitting in that guarded room with Mara pacing anxiously beside me, that the truth mattered now more than it ever had, not just for my own survival, but for whatever fragile trust had begun to form between two very different worlds in the space of a single desperate moment. The knock on my door came just before midnight, soft enough that I almost missed it beneath the sound of my own thoughts churning through everything Drask had said. When I opened it, I expected another soldier, another summons to another cold room where someone else would tell me how much danger I represented simply by existing on this planet. Instead, I found Kaya standing in the corridor, alone except for a single guard positioned a careful distance away, close enough to protect her, far enough to grant the illusion of privacy. I should not be here, she said quietly, stepping past me into the room before I could decide whether letting her in was wise. But I could not let another night pass without speaking to you directly, rather than through advisors who twist every word before it reaches either of us. I closed the door, aware of how strange the moment felt, the heir to an empire standing in my small guarded quarters like an ordinary visitor, rather than the center of a political storm. Your general thinks I am connected to the attack, I said. Drask thinks many things, she said, and her tone carried an edge I had not heard from her before. He has thought humans were a threat since long before you arrived on this planet. What happened in the court gave him a convenient reason to say it louder. "You do not believe it," I said. It was not quite a question. "I know it is not true," she said, and something in the certainty of her voice made me look at her more closely. "Because I know who planted those explosives, and it was not you, and it was not anyone connected to your delegation." The room went very still. "Who?" I asked. She hesitated, and for a moment I thought she might change her mind, might retreat back into careful diplomatic silence the way everyone else in this palace seemed trained to do. Instead, she took a breath and continued. "There is a faction within the military, loyal to Drask personally rather than to the crown, that believes the only way to protect our empire from outside influence is to make certain that no alliance with outsiders is ever allowed to take root," she said. "I do not believe Drask ordered the attack himself. I believe he is too honorable for that, whatever else he is. But I believe someone beneath him, someone who has learned his fears and decided to act on them without his knowledge, planted those explosives to create exactly the kind of crisis that would turn the court against any human presence here permanently." "How do you know this?" I asked. "Because I have spent the last 2 days doing what no one expected a princess to do," she said, a faint, tired smile crossing her face. "I have been listening. Advisors forget that heirs are meant to be seen and not heard, and sometimes that means they say things in front of us they would never say in front of my mother." I sat down slowly, trying to absorb what she was telling me. "If this is true," I said, "you need to tell your mother. You need to tell Drask himself. This could clear my name and expose whoever is actually responsible." "I intend to," she said. "But proof matters more than accusation in this court, and right now I have suspicion without evidence. If I bring this forward without something solid to support it, Drask's allies will say I am simply protecting the human who saved my life, twisting the truth to suit my own feelings." "Are you," I asked, before I could stop myself, "protecting me because of how you feel?" She looked at me for a long moment, and something in her expression shifted, softened, though it did not lose the seriousness underneath it. "You want to know why what happened in the court mattered so much," she said. "Why an embrace, something so small in your culture, caused an entire room to freeze in place." "I would like to understand it, yes," I said. She sat across from me, folding her hands together the way I imagined she had been taught since childhood, though the gesture looked less formal now, more like someone gathering courage before saying something difficult. "Our people were not always so afraid of touch," she said. "There was a time, many generations ago, before my mother's mother's mother ruled this empire, when physical connection between our people was as ordinary as it seems to be among yours. Families embraced, friends touched hands in greeting. It was not treated as a declaration or a legal statement. It was simply part of being alive together." "What changed?" I asked. "A queen was assassinated," she said quietly. "Not through blade or poison in food, though those methods had been tried and failed against her many times before. She was killed through touch itself. A trusted advisor, someone she had embraced 100 times without a second thought, carried a poison in the pores of his skin, engineered specifically to transfer through contact and take days to show its effects, long enough that no one could trace the moment of the crime back to the person responsible. By the time anyone understood what had happened, the advisor had vanished, and the queen was already beyond saving. I felt a chill move through me, understanding at last why such an ordinary human gesture had carried such enormous weight within these walls. "After that," Kaya continued, "the royal family began treating touch as something sacred, something dangerous, something to be granted only under the most controlled circumstances. Over generations, that caution hardened into law, and the law hardened into culture, until eventually no one remembered why the rule existed in the first place. They simply knew that touching royalty was forbidden, and that breaking the rule meant something enormous, even if most people alive today could not tell you exactly what that assassination centuries ago had to do with it. So when I touched you," I said slowly, piecing it together, "everyone in that room was remembering, on some level, a fear that has been passed down for generations." "Yes," she said, "and when I embraced you afterward, in full view of everyone, I was doing something no member of the royal family has done publicly, in longer than anyone can remember. I was choosing to extend trust, freely, to someone outside our bloodline, in the exact way that trust was betrayed centuries ago. That is why the room froze. Not because what I did was scandalous in a small way, but because it broke a fear so old that most people in this court did not even realize they were still carrying it." I sat in silence for a long moment, letting the weight of her explanation settle over me. It made sense now. The guards frozen mid-motion, the queen's unreadable expression, the way even Yulin, calm and careful in every other circumstance, had struggled to find the right words to describe what had happened. "Why did you do it?" I asked finally. "You could have thanked me with words. You did not have to cross that line in front of everyone." Kaya was quiet for a moment before answering, because in that instant, after everything that had happened, after the fear and the falling stone, and the certainty that I was about to die, the only thing that felt true was gratitude, she said. I did not think about centuries of law or the fear my ancestors carried forward without understanding why. I thought about the fact that a stranger from another world had risked his own life for mine without a moment of hesitation, and I wanted him to know, in a way that words could never fully carry, exactly what that meant to me. Before I could respond, the door burst open without warning, and General Drask himself stood in the frame, flanked by 2 soldiers, his storm-gray eyes moving quickly between the princess and me with an expression that made my stomach drop all over again. "I was told you had come here," he said to Kaya, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Alone, unguarded, in the middle of the night, in the humans' private quarters. Do you understand what this looks like? What this will mean if word reaches the wrong ears in this palace?" "I am not unguarded," Kaya said, gesturing toward the corridor where her escort still stood. "And I came here because I needed the truth spoken plainly, without advisors shaping it into something more convenient for their own arguments." Drask's gaze shifted to me, sharp and suspicious. "What have you told her?" he demanded. "I have told him nothing he did not already deserve to hear," Kaya said before I could answer, stepping slightly in front of me in a gesture that startled both Drask and myself. "I have told him the truth about our history, about why touch matters so deeply among our people, and I have told him what I have learned about who is truly responsible for the attack on the court." Drask went very still. "What have you learned?" he asked, his voice quieter now, more careful. "That someone beneath your command planted those explosives without your knowledge, hoping to use the chaos to force every human off this planet permanently," she said. "I do not have full proof yet, but I have enough to know where to look, and I intend to find that proof before anyone decides to punish an innocent man for a crime committed by people hiding within your own ranks." For a long moment, Drask said nothing, his expression cycling through something I could not fully read: disbelief, anger, and beneath it all, something that looked almost like fear, the particular fear of a man realizing the enemy he had been searching for might be standing far closer to him than he had ever imagined. "If this is true," he said finally, his voice low, "then I will find them myself, and I will make certain they answer for what they have done, regardless of rank or loyalty." "Then help us prove it," Kaya said. "Instead of wasting time trying to remove a man who saved my life for a crime he did not commit." Drask's eyes moved to me one final time, and something in his expression shifted, not warmth, not yet, but a grudging reconsideration of everything he had believed about me since the moment the court had frozen around us. "If you are lying to me, human," he said, "there will be nowhere on this planet or any other where you can hide from what follows." "I am not lying," I said. "I want the truth found as much as anyone in this palace. More, maybe, since my life depends on it." Drask studied me a moment longer, then turned to his soldiers, issuing quiet orders I could not fully follow, before striding from the room with the same controlled fury he had entered with. Kaya remained behind, watching the door close, her shoulders sinking slightly with the release of tension she had clearly been holding since the moment Drask appeared. "That could have gone worse," she said, and despite everything, I found myself almost smiling at the understatement. "It could have," I agreed. "Thank you for defending me the way you did." She turned to face me fully, and something in her expression had changed since the conversation began. Something quieter, more certain. "I meant every word I said to him," she told me, "and I meant what happened in the court that day, even though I understand now how complicated it has made everything since." "I do not regret it either," I said, and I realized as I said it that it was true. Whatever consequences followed, whatever danger still waited in the corridors of this palace, I could not bring myself to regret the instinct that had carried me across the room toward a falling wall, or the moment afterward when an entire court had gone silent around us. Kaya left soon after, her guard falling into step beside her as she disappeared down the corridor, and I stood alone in my quarters for a long time afterward, thinking about centuries-old fear, about poison passed through trusted hands, about the fragile, dangerous, necessary work of proving that not every outsider who reaches toward you means harm. The truth was close now, closer than it had been since the explosions first tore through the eastern wall of the court. But truth alone would not be enough to end this. Somewhere in this palace, someone who had planned to kill a princess and frame an innocent man was still free, still watching, and I understood. Standing alone in the quiet after Kaya's visit, that the most dangerous part of this story had not yet arrived. The proof came together faster than any of us expected, and far more dangerously than any of us wanted. 3 days after Kaya's visit to my quarters, General Drask summoned the entire delegation, human and virili alike, to the reconstructed Eastern Hall where the attack had taken place. Workers had cleared away the broken stone and shattered glass, though scorch marks still darkened the pale blue walls where the explosions had torn through them, a permanent reminder of how close that day had come to ending very differently. I stood near Ambassador Grant and Mara, watching as Drask entered flanked by soldiers, his expression grim but steady, the look of a man who had found an answer he did not want but intended to deliver regardless of the cost. 3 officers within my own command staged the attack on this court, he announced, his voice carrying across the silent hall. They believed, wrongly, that I would approve of their methods if not their timing. They believed that framing a human for the crime would accomplish what years of argument in the Royal Council could not, the permanent removal of outsiders from virilized soil. A murmur moved through the gathered nobles, and I felt every eye in the room shift briefly toward me before returning to Drask. They were wrong, he continued, not only in their methods, which nearly cost the heir to this empire her life, but in their understanding of what I actually believe. I have spent my life distrusting outsiders because I have seen the damage careless alliances can cause, but I did not build my career on murdering an innocent child to prove a point, and I will not stand beside those who did, regardless of how closely their fears may have once matched my own. The 3 officers, revealed and arrested days earlier once Kaya's suspicions had been confirmed through careful investigation, were led before the court in restraints, their faces unreadable, offering no defense for what they had done. I felt something ease in my chest, watching them stand there, a tension I had been carrying since the moment the ceiling first cracked above the dais. Queen Nisara rose from her throne and addressed the hall, her voice carrying the same quiet authority I remembered from our conversation in the narrow stone room days earlier. "Let it be known throughout this court and beyond it," she said, "that the attack on this palace was not the work of the human delegation, nor any ally of theirs. It was the work of those within our own ranks who allowed fear to become something far more dangerous than caution. Let it also be known that the human who acted that day, without hesitation, without thought for his own safety, to protect my daughter, acted with a courage this court would do well to remember, rather than punish." I felt Mara's hand find my shoulder briefly, a small gesture of relief and pride that meant more than she probably realized. Ambassador Grant let out a breath beside me that sounded like it had been held for days. The Queen turned toward Kaya, who stood near the dais, and something passed between mother and daughter that I could not fully interpret, though it looked, from where I stood, like a kind of quiet understanding neither of them needed words to express. "There remains the matter of what happened between my daughter and this human," the Queen continued, and the hall fell silent again, tighter this time, everyone aware that the true reckoning of the story had not yet arrived. Our laws surrounding contact with the royal bloodline were written generations ago, in the aftermath of a betrayal that scarred this family forever. They were written to protect us. But laws written from fear, if never reconsidered, risk becoming cages rather than shields. She paused, looking out over the assembled court, humans and virili standing together in a hall still marked by the violence of days earlier. "I have spoken with my daughter at length about what happened, and why," the Queen said. "I have listened to advisors on both sides of this argument. And I have come to a decision that I expect will not please everyone in this room, though I believe, in time, it will serve this empire better than the fear we have carried, for longer than any of us can remember." She turned to face me directly, and I felt every muscle in my body tense under the weight of her attention. "Effective from this day forward," she said, "contact between the royal bloodline and any individual who has demonstrated true loyalty and courage on behalf of this family shall no longer be treated as an automatic declaration bound by ancient law. Instead, such moments shall be recognized for what they truly are, a choice, made freely, by those who share them, and honored as such rather than feared." The hall erupted into quiet, disbelieving murmurs, though I noticed General Drask, standing near the dais, did not look nearly as troubled by the announcement as I might have expected. He caught my eye briefly across the hall and offered the smallest nod I had ever seen a man give, though I understood, somehow, exactly what it meant. Kaya stepped forward then, and for the first time since the day of the attack, she crossed the distance between us in front of the entire court, without a single flicker of hesitation, without a single guard moving to intervene, without the room freezing around us the way it had before. She stopped in front of me, and for a long moment neither of us spoke. Then she extended her hand, Not an embrace this time, but something equally deliberate, a gesture chosen carefully in front of witnesses who now understood it did not carry the same weight it once had. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything you risked, and everything you endured because of it." I took her hand, and this time no one in the hall froze, no one gasped, no one reached for a weapon. The world simply continued, the way it should have all along. Two people from different worlds standing together in a hall built on centuries of fear that had finally begun, slowly, to loosen its grip. In the weeks that followed, everything changed, though not all at once, and not without difficulty. General Drask remained skeptical of humans as a whole, though his skepticism toward me personally softened into something I might have called respect, had either of us been willing to use that word aloud. He requested, of all things, that I join him for a private conversation shortly before the Meridian was scheduled to depart, and though the meeting was brief, he told me, in his own careful way, that he had misjudged the depth of my intentions, even if he still questioned the wisdom of trusting outsiders as a general principle. Cyril Thane, the advisor who had long argued for greater openness with other worlds, used the events of that day to push through a series of new agreements between the Virali Empire and the human delegation, agreements that would have taken years to negotiate under ordinary circumstances, accelerated now by a single moment of instinct that had proven, in the clearest way possible, that trust between two different peoples was not only possible, but worth protecting. Kaya and I spoke often in the weeks before my departure, walking sometimes through gardens near the palace where the pale blue stone gave way to plants unlike anything I had seen on any world before, colors and shapes that seemed to shift gently with the light. She asked me questions about Earth, about my life before I ever set foot on her world, and I found myself answering more openly than I had with almost anyone since arriving, as though the events we had survived together had stripped away some of the careful distance diplomats were trained to maintain. I did not know, when the Meridian finally prepared to leave the Virali homeworld, whether I would return, or when, or what shape the relationship between our two peoples would take in the years ahead. But I knew, standing on the observation deck as the pale blue mountains of the palace shrank into the distance below us, that something had shifted permanently that day in the royal court, something far larger than a single embrace between two people who barely knew each other at the time. A rule built from centuries of fear had finally been questioned, and found, in the end, not strong enough to withstand the simple, undeniable truth of what people are capable of when they choose courage over caution, connection over distance, trust over the safety of staying carefully, permanently apart. I still think about that moment sometimes, the falling stone, the frozen court, the warmth of an unexpected embrace that changed the course of two entire worlds. I think about how easily I could have stayed where I was supposed to stay, invisible, careful, uninvolved, and how different everything might have turned out if I had. But I did not stay where I was supposed to stay. I moved, without thinking, towards someone who needed help, and in doing so, I helped prove something neither species had fully believed until that day, that the distance between two very different peoples is not always as vast as centuries of fear would have them believe, and that sometimes all it takes to begin closing that distance is a single, instinctive act of courage, offered freely, without calculation, in the space of a single, unguarded moment. The Meridian carried me home eventually, back toward Earth and the life I had known before any of this began. But I left a part of that story behind me, on the Virali homeworld, in a palace built from pale blue stone, in a hall still bearing the faint marks of an attack that had nearly ended everything, and in the memory of an entire royal court frozen in place, watching two strangers from different worlds discover, together, that some walls are worth tearing down, no matter how long they have stood, and no matter how much fear was used to build them in the first place.